All right, good day everyone. It's John here from the Ohazas podcast. A big Ohazas to everyone. Good morning from Nagoya, Japan. And in another effort to more be like myself. That's an interesting new expression that I just made up. I'm going to try to be a bit more natural. We've been talking about all of this stuff on Spaces and on Twitter, on X, with the other gaijin creators here in Japan. And it's a constant challenge for me, trying to be more natural, be more like myself on camera. Looking at my own videos, the two that I made previously, I think I get nervous for some reason with the camera. I'm still not very comfortable with it, so please bear with me as I continue to hopefully improve on screen and on camera and become more comfortable talking to you guys via this lens. If you're listening on the audio, I hope the audio is okay today. Last time we had a bit of a glitch and the audio from the microphone was not recording, it was recording, but at a very bad, with a very bad quality. And fortunately, the camera's audio was picking up my voice, and it sounded horrible, but it was better than what was being captured through the microphone, surprisingly. So apologies for that in the last episode. Okay, so today we're going to talk about a few topics as always, and we're going to end with word of the day. So make sure you hang around to the end of the episode for that. And yeah, let's go. Let's begin today's episode. So today we've got finally the story behind this background here. And a few people actually commented to me when I first started testing this idea and playing around with the idea that this looked a bit like a green screen. And it's actually not. I'll show you, I'll touch it for you. And so you can see it's in fact an actual shop curtain. These are called Noren in Japanese, Noren. And I did a quick bit of research on Wikipedia, a whole 10 seconds, and I found that these have apparently been in use since about the late 10th century or so, I think it was, or about the 10th century, the late Heian period, it said. Heian Jidai is one of the periods in ancient Japan. And yeah, so these are often used in businesses. They usually hang them outside the front door, the sliding door. And originally, according to Wikipedia and a bit of the research that I did, they were used to just protect, the inside of the building or the room from wind, from rain, that kind of thing. I also find that it gives people a bit of privacy. You can actually, usually they only go about halfway down the door. So you can actually still see people's feet and things as they walk in, or if people are seated at a counter at a place like a sushi bar, you can actually see that there are customers in there because you can see their feet on the stools and things like that. And you can obviously see them if they're walking around inside the establishment. But it kind of gives you an idea that there is life in there. But the people still maintain their privacy because you can't see their faces because of this Noren. Anyway, that's enough about Noren trivia and that kind of thing. Now let's move on to the story behind this. This is quite an interesting story. So back in the late 90s, I spent about a year in Osaka, in Higashi Osaka to be exact. Between a lot of you who have traveled Japan will know Namba and Umeda in Osaka. They're the main kind of CBDs over there. And I was living in a place in between those areas and another very famous place called Nara, which is, of course, the ancient capital of Japan. And so I was living in a place called Higashi Osaka, which is East Osaka. And at the time, I was in a bit of a strange, odd situation. I could probably do a whole episode on my life there. I could probably do a few episodes actually on my life there. But basically, the part of the story which relates to the Noren is that the place that I was living in the last few months while I was there actually had no hot water. There was no gas connected. And because I was only going to live there for a few months, my friend's mother, who was the owner of that place, told me that, if you can get by for a few months without hot water, then it'll save everyone a whole lot of hassle and you won't have to pay gas and all that sort of stuff as well. And I was like, but, obviously you're probably thinking about the same thing. How are you going to take showers and, how are you going to keep yourself clean and that kind of thing? And so she said, don't worry, there's a centaur, which is just around the corner. And they're open, from, I think it was from, although I never went in the morning, so I don't know what time they opened, but I know very well that they closed at about midnight because I would finish work. I was working in an izakaya at the time, which is a Japanese style restaurant. And I was doing a baito, part-time job in this izakaya in Ni Umeda, which is in the middle of the city there. And I'd come back at about 11 or 11:30 and I'd stay till close, which was about midnight. So I was very fortunate to have that place. It saved everyone the hassle of hooking gas up at the old place I was living at for the last few months during my stay in the late 90s. And so I was a regular at this onsen. And this is actually, this Noren here says gyunyu sekken on the bottom here. So it's probably been provided to the onsen by one of the suppliers of the soaps and things like that. But what happened was when I left Osaka back then in the late 90s, I told the lady there, probably she was the owner, and I told her that I'd be leaving, and I was quite sad because, they looked after me in a lot of ways because sometimes I'd be late and they'd stay back for me and that kind of thing. So I said, I'm going to go back to Australia in maybe few weeks or something at the time. I think it was. Maybe I told them, about a month before I left, I think. And the next time I went there, she had this brand new envelope. It was probably an A3 sized envelope. And it was a thick envelope. And I was like, what is that? She gave this to me as a gift, as a parting gift. And I opened it up and it was this Noren, brand new, crispy clean. And it's still got its crease lines and things like that. And I thought that was such a nice gesture. It probably, like I said, maybe she had received it from one of her suppliers and maybe it didn't cost a lot of money or anything. But I just felt so touched by that gesture that she was thoughtful enough to give me a gift, a parting gift, someone she had only known for a couple of months or a few months. And I thought that was really nice. So I held on to it because it was important for me. It has some sentimental value. And I had always kept it with me. And I brought it with me to Japan 12 years ago. And speaking of when I came back to Japan, that was, 12 years ago. We're actually on our Japan anniversary tomorrow. So it's going to be 12 years exactly since I've been living in Nagoya. But that's another story. And so, that's always been with me. I've been carrying it around ever since. And a few months ago when I was playing around with the idea of doing videos like this, I actually had an idea. I was like, because I live in this really, I'm in this small room and there aren't many nice things I can use as a background. And it's hard to come up with. If you have any ideas, feel free to let me know in the comments about what I can do for, where to film this or how to film this kind of video. But for the time being, I'm actually very happy with this background because it has some kind of a meaning as well behind it. So that's the story behind the Noren. The Noren mystery has been officially solved. If you have any questions about that or the experience I had back in Osaka, feel free to drop some comments down below and I'll be more than happy to reply to you. Okay. Moving on to our next topic. What do I love about Japan? So Riki, otherwise known as Paprika Girl on X, posed the question to us. And, there's a deep element to it as well. I'm just going to go into general kind of topics on she asked, what do we love about Japan? She actually gave me two questions. The first initial question was quite deep. And it was like, what keeps you in Japan? Or, sorry, I can't remember the exact wording, but I remember what it meant. And it was kind of like, what keeps you in Japan? Or why do you stay in Japan? And she said something like, without using family as a reason. So she was looking for like a deep reason as to why we choose to stay in Japan. And there are, family was a big thing for me, though. It's very hard for me to exclude that because if there wasn't the family element, I honestly don't know if I'd be here right now. I know I probably would have been back for a little bit, but I don't know if I would have stayed this long. And it's hard to say, and be hypothetical about it, because if I didn't have family, things could have been extremely different, couldn't they? So it's hard to say exactly what I might have been doing if I didn't have my family situation. But there are definitely a lot of things that make me very happy about being in Japan and staying in, and maybe they do keep me here. So they may seem like the typical, usual, superficial reasons why people say they love Japan. But I think they do contribute to the reason why I stay. And perhaps, maybe, they are the reasons why I stay in Japan or why I love Japan so much. So I'm going to say them anyway. Am I out of focus? Oh, no. I've got a little monitor over there. I hope I haven't been out of focus for too long, because that'll be annoying. I've got this little remote here that helps me focus myself on this camera. I don't have any fancy gear at the moment, so I'm very into photography, but video stuff, it's kind of new. So I'm not sort of investing in fancy new equipment just yet. But if we keep going with this stuff, who knows? The sky's the limit, as they say. But I've got my little list here of things that I do love about Japan. And pardon me as I look down, I don't have like a script, teleprompter or anything here. I just blabber on without a script over here on the Ohazas podcast, as you guys probably know by now. But, okay, so number one, I feel like there's more common courtesy in Japan. When you go around in the shopping center or at the train station or wherever, people give each other, I mean, there are exceptions to this. I know some of you will be rolling your eyes saying, oh, you haven't been to blah, 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 to Tokyo or to... I've been to many places, and I know that there are many exceptions, but I am actually just saying these as general observations. So I am generalizing, but most of the time not most of the time, but for all of these things that I'm going to say, in my experience, and I appreciate that you may have a very different experience, but in my experience, these things have been much better in Japan compared to back home in Australia. So, number one, more common courtesy. When I walk around the streets and when I'm on the train or whatever, I observe that people are more respectful, and there's a lot of more common sense than there is back in Australia. People will, for no apparent reason, scream and talk loudly and swear as they're on the train or on the bus. You might be with your child, and the person in front of you might be just swearing and being really nasty and inconsiderate. Inconsiderate is probably the word I'm looking for. There's a lot of inconsiderate behavior in Australia, in my experience. Again, I need to keep saying that because I appreciate that some people have very different experiences, and I totally respect that and appreciate it. But this is my experience. And next, things just work. Okay, so a lot of things in Australia where people will say, a business might say, this is the service we're offering and this is how much it costs. And you go and you pay for it. And as you should, you expect what you were told, and you don't get what you've been told, and it's completely off. And so that kind of thing really kind of annoys me. It frustrates me, and it feels like I've been cheated on because I'm paying for something that was promised and I'm not getting it. So that really, really upsets me, and I don't like that feeling. And I find that I get less of that. Sometimes, a lot of the time, I don't get that at all in Japan. Something will be very clearly written or explained in detail, and I will get it exactly the way that it was described, and without people sort of lying to me and trying to deceive. I don't know if deceiving is the right word, but yeah, maybe it is a form of deceit, because people will literally tell you, I will give you this X, Y, Z, and you don't get it, or you get it, but in a really bad way. It's not satisfactory. So that's another one. Cleanliness in general is without a doubt, and I think most people will agree with me on this one, it's so much cleaner in Japan. One very common example that comes up is public toilets. Public toilets. Last time I went back to Australia, it was about a year ago, and I was with my daughter and we went to a few public toilets. In one of them, my daughter actually got locked in because the lock had been broken by a vandal and the handle was missing on the inside of the door and she couldn't get out. And she was banging the door and she ended up having to put her finger into the hole of the lock, into the groove where the handle was supposed to be, and she turned it with her finger. And there's a whole story behind that as well. But anyway, nothing happened. Nothing bad happened to her. But that kind of stuff just doesn't happen here. You know, like toilets work here. They have locks. They, you know, obviously there are exceptions. There might be the odd bathroom, one in a million, where that, you know, it might have been like that. But this was in a major shopping center in the middle of the city of Sydney, right? So this shouldn't be happening in such a location. And unfortunately, this is quite common in Sydney. Personally, for me, I had to go to the loo. The loo is, Australian English for bathroom. I had to go to the bathroom a few times while I was over there because we were out almost every day, you know, wandering around the city. And so I went to the bathroom a few times. I don't want to say vulgar things on this podcast, but almost every cubicle and almost every toilet that I saw during my 10-day or whatever visit it was, how do I say this without sounding too vulgar? The toilet seats were not the color that they were supposed to be, if you catch my drift. But so every toilet was just disgusting, you know, and that sort of thing, the cleanliness aspect of the toilet is, of course, it's excellent here in Japan. The toilets are clean. It's a given, you know, and we take it for granted maybe sometimes after living here for some time, but it's something that's just incredibly disgusting and bad in Australia. And I think from what I hear in other countries as well around the world. And in Japan, as you guys probably know, we also have like, shower toilets, what they're called, where they've got the built-in bidet function. And I was joking when I replied to you, Riki, on X when I said, shower toilets are the reason I stay here. But there is a little bit of truth to it as well. I wasn't fully joking when I said that. And cleanliness in general, of course, is a big thing here as well. There's not much rubbish lying around. People are quite clean. They, you know, because of the lack of rubbish bins on the streets, people usually take their rubbish home with them. And yeah, just overall, it's hard for me to say that Japan is a dirty country. And of course, there are exceptions. There will be people posting pictures, and I've done this as well, just as a joke. There are some times when we see dirty scenes in Japan where people will have dumped a bunch of rubbish or a bunch of cans or bottles or something like that on the street. And it's like, oh, that's very un-Japanese. That's a very un-Japanese scene. But yeah, generally speaking, like 90% of the time, the place is spotless and it's fantastic. And it also pressures people. I actually had a friend visiting from overseas the other day. It was a fantastic catch up. I wish we could do that a lot more often. But he actually observed that, you know, the fact that it's so clean, it pressures you in a good way to not litter, because you don't want to be the one who makes the mess, right? When something is really clean, it kind of deters people from being dirty. And there's also another thing behind this as well. It's not only that people don't litter, but when they do, and this actually isn't mentioned as often as I think it should be, it's not just that people don't litter. It's that when people litter, it's cleaned up very quickly. Whereas back in Australia, if someone litters, that might stay there for a couple of weeks. You know, whereas in Japan, especially if it's in a high traffic area, in a low traffic area, it might be different. But in a high traffic area, like let's say a subway station, for example, if someone throws a plastic bag away in the corner of the train station, that's not going to be there tomorrow, you know, or even the same day. Someone will clean that up. And that's actually something a Japanese person brought up to me, raised and said, you know what? There's a misunderstanding. Like, people say that Japanese people don't litter or don't do anything bad. And he was like, and he's Japanese. And he was like, they do bad things sometimes. But there's someone will come by and quickly clean it up. And he said, I think overseas, there's not as much of that. Anyway, that's the other one. Public transport, I quickly touched on that when I brought up common courtesy. And public transport here is just, I can't praise it enough. Inside the train, it's nice and quiet. There's no loud conversations. And, again, I'm going to have to put the fine print down here. It's not 100% of the time. There will always be exceptions no matter where you go. But most of the time, you will be able to close your eyes and sleep on a train. It's fantastic. When you're tired, the last thing you need is someone sitting right next to you, loudly speaking on the phone. And that's another thing. People generally do not use their phones, as in have conversations on their phones. Of course, people use their smartphones to do, text messaging and browse the internet and stuff like that, using earphones, of course. But generally speaking, 99% of the time, you will not hear someone speaking on the phone loudly. So that's another thing. Good healthcare is next on my list. Unfortunately, I've had some very bad experiences healthcare-wise. Not bad experiences healthcare-wise, but I've had some medical situations or conditions which were very, very difficult times in my life. That's another, and I don't know how much I want to talk about that stuff on this podcast, but I can say it was very challenging in many ways, and it was a very trying time. And the level of professionalism I experienced from the healthcare staff here and the actual system, when I say system, I mean the payments, the paperwork, the way that very difficult things were handled, things that affect your life long term. And of course I had a couple of doctors who weren't ideal. And I think, that can happen anywhere, where you don't sort of, feel that the doctor really cares about you. But in my experience, I was very lucky. I was very fortunate to have very good doctors here. I did have one or two who were so-so, but no one who was negligent or bad, I think. And overall, it was just so, again, like it comes back to that first one that I think it was the first one that I brought up, or second one that I brought up here on this list, was that you get what you pay for, and people do, things work. People do what they tell you that they're going to do. So if the doctor tells you, like, your appointment is tomorrow at 2 p.m., please be here, 5 minutes early. You get there 5 minutes early, and, there might be a 5-minute delay or something, like the appointment's at 2, you might get called at 2:05. Sometimes, depending on the urgency of what you're having done, there might be other people might be prioritized, things like that. But generally speaking, it's very efficient and on time. So that's something I really, really, really appreciate. And even since then, after that was quite a few years ago, almost 10 years ago now, which, geez, time flies, because that was a crazy period of my life. But it's been almost 10 years. And even since then, even with general checkups and things like that, things here with healthcare are done very well, in my experience. And that's something I really appreciate, and probably is one of the things subconsciously or probably consciously as well that keeps me here. I hear stories from my family back home in Australia where the doctor said this, then something else happened, and they were made to wait for 8 hours in a hospital, for a small, just for a small thing, and Australia's supposed to be a developed country and supposed to be one of the best countries in the world. It's for crying out loud, it's one of the most expensive, especially Sydney. It's one of the most expensive places to live right now in the world. And from the stories that I hear on a regular basis from the people that I know there, I'm surprised. I'm in awe. So to get really, really good service, you have to pay even more. And even then you sometimes don't get the level of service or care that you get in Japan. So that's another one. Okay, moving on to more sort of probably deep things. The things I've mentioned up till now are very sort of not superficial. Well, maybe they are superficial, but are quite easy to grasp, I guess. One thing I want to bring up, I'll probably end it with this one because the list just goes on and on. I've got plenty of things to talk about. But one thing I felt when I came to Japan, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword. It has its pros and its cons. And that is that I feel that the people give you more privacy is probably the word. Things like work and family and friends are very compartmentalized. So back in Australia, I felt like my family, and this might just be me with my family. It could be different for you guys. It could be, a very an individual thing. So I appreciate that as well. But I feel like in Japan, people sort of are better at not mixing family and work and private life. And they seem to be, and I know some people are going to disagree with this, but they seem to be less judgmental when it comes to your work performance and what's going on at home or in your private life. So if you're, say, really good at what you do, and then there's like, this part about your life that it might have influenced your work back home, over here it's kind of, I feel like they're very good, and I can't really give a good, clear example of this, but I think if you've been here for a little while, you might understand what I'm talking about. And if you have any thoughts on this, I'd love you to drop a comment and let me know what your experience has been, or if you agree or disagree with this. But I feel like people here are better at judging things on just that, without letting something else influence their opinion or their judgment on that thing. And yeah, this is an interesting one. I might actually think about this a bit more. Maybe I will come up with some examples and bring them up in future episodes. But that's something that I felt after a couple of weeks. Again, with family and stuff as well, even within family, I noticed that, and this is a double-edged sword because I didn't actually say why that is, but it's because sometimes it can feel like people don't care about you because they don't interfere in those other spheres, or they don't want to know, or they don't ask, or they don't let them interfere with your work, for example. So it can make you feel, or it can contribute to that feeling of isolation or loneliness, which we brought up in the last episode. And I think that that's why it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. So people are good at leaving you alone and not sticking their nose into everything in your life, which is a fantastic thing. I personally like that. I don't like it when people are Oh, sorry. I hope that didn't affect the focus. So it can affect you in that way because people, don't really stick their nose into your business, and that's a good thing. But yeah, it can mean that, maybe you feel like people don't care about you enough, stuff like that. So that's a double-edged sword. But it is something that I do like about Japan, and I think it's something that I prefer, to be honest. Do I prefer having people around me who are nosy all the time and sort of trying to stick their nose into my business and trying to tell me how to live, and within families as well? Back in Australia, I felt like families are more concerned with each other's, their cousins, their nephews, their nieces, their brothers and sisters and that kind of thing. And over here, I feel like people are really good at kind of separating and saying, you know what, this is my life and that's your life. And it's okay for me to have mine and you to have yours. And we both don't say anything about it to each other. Like we don't judge and we don't tell people how to do things, and that leads to accountability as well. And people, I feel, as a result of that, are more incentivized to think more carefully about what they do in their lives. So if someone's always telling you like, I think you should do it this way because I did it this way and it was good. And, you should really do it this way, and then if you do it and if things work out, then that person gets, credit for that. And it's not you who were responsible for that, but that the person who gave you advice to do that, and vice versa. If you fail, it's not your fault. It's that person's fault. The person who gave you advice, right? You can say, I didn't want to do this, but so-and-so told me that I should do it this way and I did it and didn't work. So it's their fault, so it's not good from that sort of side of things as well. It might sort of, make people avoid taking responsibility for their actions or that kind of thing. Anyway, like I said, that's going to be the end of my list. I rambled on for quite a bit. Sorry for the long sort of section on that. I hope it's okay. I'm just going to check my feed. It looks like things are recording still and they're okay. So hopefully we can keep going. All right. So let's see. Next up, yes, there's one more topic I want to bring up before we wrap it up and head into word of the day to finish up our episode. This is another one where I've given it a bit of deep thought, and it's something I wanted to share. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, I think on X, and it's something that, again, it's just something I've experienced and I've observed in other people who do this, and that is reading books in Japanese. And so obviously it's difficult to read a book that's been written in Japanese if you can't, read or understand the language. But these days we actually have, a lot of fantastic automated translation services and tools. So I'm thinking, is it really an excuse anymore to not read in Japanese if you can't read Japanese? Maybe we can use tools and things to translate these types of things. But the reason this came up, and that's probably another topic, but I guess my message is to people who can read Japanese, or maybe you can and you think you can't read it well enough, and so you don't do this. But I want to talk about reading books that have been written for the Japanese population about things that you need help with. And I've noticed, and this came up because I'm usually reading something. I'm not a huge reader, by the way. I'll say that in advance. I'm not like some, intellect. But I do like to get a book every now and then on Kindle or an actual paper book from the bookstore. And one, it helps me to remember the Japanese that I know. To be honest, I actually brought this up the other day on the Twitter group, that I feel like my Japanese level has declined over the last couple of years or few years, but that's another story. But I do like to read something just to help me maintain what I have. Spoken Japanese, I'm sort of okay with that. I'm not perfect, but I'm sort of okay because I can use that on a regular basis. But reading is something that you probably should do on a regular basis if you want to keep that, because it's very easy to forget how to read a language quickly, especially with kanji-based kind of languages like Japanese. You've got 3 scripts in Japanese, right? You've got your hiragana, katakana, and kanji. And so if you don't read on a regular basis, it's very easy to forget all of especially the kanji. And your speed can actually decline as well. But going into the actual, the meaning behind what I'm saying here is that a lot of the problems that you face in Japan, either as a foreigner or whatever, I think that's irrelevant in this context, is that the books that have been written by Japanese people in Japan have been written for people here specifically, right? So I'm going to start with a very easy to understand example. So there's this thing called NISA, NISA, which is like a superannuation system, right? Where you can invest actually iDeCo let's use iDeCo. iDeCo is the equivalent of the superannuation system in Australia, where it's like a retirement fund and you put money into it and there are tax incentives, like you don't have to pay tax on the profits, and don't quote me on that's roughly something like this. And whatever you put into that, you can actually tax deduct the amount. So you can lower your taxable income so you can pay less tax. So that's, something that the government obviously wants people to do, and it will help you in your retirement, hopefully. So something like iDeCo, right? How many books do you think there are on iDeCo in English written specifically for the Japanese iDeCo system compared to iDeCo books written in Japanese, right? So to my knowledge, there are almost no books in English about iDeCo in Japan. There's probably one or two. Feel free to prove me wrong. You can put them in the comments if you like. But you will find probably 100 books or more written in Japanese by Japanese people. Well, maybe not by Japanese people. It doesn't really matter who wrote them, but they're in Japanese because the audience here is mainly people who speak and read and write Japanese. So think about this a little more. iDeCo is a very simple example, very practical example. But what about something like having trouble with dealing with people at your workplace, or understanding how to deal with people in a professional setting? You'll see dozens and hundreds of people on Reddit, on X, on Facebook, everywhere, whinging about and complaining about how Japan is like this, and this is not how we do it in Australia or America or in England or in Canada or in New Zealand. And so Japan is bad, it's horrible, and blah, 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 and no one understands, and all of that kind of stuff. And I get it. I've been there as well. I also came from Australia, and a lot of things were very strange to me and didn't make sense. But guess what? Foreigners are not the only people who think there are weird things about the work culture here. There's a lot of Japanese people as well who are just like, they're as fed up as you are. So guess what? There are a bunch of books about how to deal with these kinds of difficult situations. How do you adjust? How do you learn to work with people who are difficult? Because it's very easy for people to say, like, if let's say, for example, that 7 out of 10 coworkers have a certain trait, right? And if they're all Japanese people, your brain logically will sort of jump to the conclusion that, 7 out of 10 Japanese people are like this, and that's horrible. And so Japan's a horrible place, and the Japanese workers and people, co-workers are horrible, and it's not a good system, and I hate this. The reality is, in sometimes or in many cases, that it's not 7 out of 10 equals like 70% of Japanese equals 70% of Japan equals millions and millions of Japanese people. Most of the time, it means that 7 out of 10 people in your company are like that. And it's not because they're Japanese, but it's because they're crap people, right? That's more possible, in my experience, than jumping to the conclusion that the whole of Japan is horrible. Okay. So guess what? There are books that talk about this. There are books that will help you to cope, to work with people like that. There are a lot of, and it's not just that workplace. There are many workplaces that are like that. And it's not because it's a racial thing, but it can be because that culture has developed and evolved over time and become like that. And maybe there are some industries where that's prevalent, but it's not every single workplace. And by all means, if you find that it is every single workplace in your industry, maybe you can look at a different, a path, or if it's something that you can't deal with or whatever. But what I'm trying to say is there are books out there and materials that are written in Japanese that will help you to cope with whatever situation you're in. It can be books about business. Maybe you want to start a business and you don't know what to do, and there are challenges. a lot of those answers can be found in books written in Japanese. There are books about keigo, believe it or not. A lot of foreigners will complain about how difficult keigo is to learn or to speak. And guess what? A lot of Japanese people also complain about how difficult it is to use keigo. So there are books that give you advice on how to use it and what to avoid and what to stick with. The current book that I'm reading is actually called How to Avoid the 12 Bad Habits of the Brain. Is a loose translation of what that is. But it's got some fantastic tips, and it gives you actual examples of like work situations where you might have a certain type of colleague, with a certain type of personality that you find very difficult. And it will give you advice on how to approach that, how to deal with it, how to turn that around and make it positive. So I just felt there was that realization. It was a few weeks ago. And as I was reading through one of these books that I had, I was like, I wonder if people are aware that they can actually get a lot of answers through Japanese books. And actually another one that I just thought of now, which I'll mention while I'm here, is language learning. If you ever want to sort of see how a language is learned from a different point of view, have a look at English textbooks written for Japanese people in Japanese. It's actually a great way to learn Japanese. And it also, at the same time, it will give you tools and information on how you can also effectively teach English to people in Japan. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can take advantage of Japanese books. Anyway, I hope I didn't go too off track, and I hope the message came across. The message is, go to a local bookshop in Japan if you're here. And even if you can't read Japanese very fluently, that actually might be another benefit of doing this. Your Japanese reading skills will improve immensely if you try to read in Japanese every day, or at least a few times a week. Anyway, that's all for today in terms of what we're speaking about. And as promised, there's word of the day at the end. And today's word of the day is sento, which I actually slipped out, I think, at the beginning of the video. And sento is actually a public bath, and it's where I received this Noren as a gift. You might be wondering what the difference is between a sento and an onsen. There is actually a technical difference. They're both large bathhouses and they look very similar, but a sento is like a man-made bath. So the water is not coming from an actual natural spring. It's just basically the water that comes through your tap, and it's been heated and then put into bathtubs and things like that. Whereas an onsen is a natural hot spring. So the water is being sourced from, I think it's always underground, but it's basically naturally sourced water, and I guess hot water. And it usually contains minerals and things like that, which people say are very good for your skin and help you to relax and that kind of thing. Anyway, that's all for today, guys and girls. And I hope you have a fantastic week ahead. We're still on Wednesday, I believe it is today. So yeah, it's hump day. Happy hump day. And good luck with the rest of the week. Hopefully we'll have another episode over the next few days. And as I always say, bye for now.